pure as the driven snow, hiding the damage underneath. Hi there, I'm Roux. Welcome to my video where I talk about whatever I want. Inspired by D'Angelo I am, yes. And today I want to talk about purity culture. So I put out a poll and I asked you guys, what do you guys want to see next? And the votes have come in, and today we're talking about purity culture. Thank you for everyone who voted, by the way. You're awesome. What is purity culture? If you look it up on Google, it says culture of abstinence. The label of purity culture has a range of meanings. Many use it in its most literal form to refer to efforts, especially in conservative Protestant Christianity, to promote sexual abstinence prior to marriage. So it's basically a thing that started up in the late 80s, early 90s, so basically when I was growing up, where a lot of movements were started, especially within certain Christian communities, that promoted abstinence only. As in, the only real way to have a happy life is to never ever have sex until you get married. And it did affect mainstream media. Like, for instance, if you see in movies, like horror movies, it's like, oh, the classic rules, if you're a virgin, you'll survive, but if you're not, then you'll die. It's a tongue-in-cheek example, but it's been a pervasive thing throughout society because of these movements that were started by strict religious communities. It's also had a huge impact on society in the way that it's hammered in the notion that girls who are not sexually active are somehow better, purer, and really contributed to the systematic slut-shaming of women who are sexually active. So although it was started in a relatively small portion of society, guided by very restrictive religious views, it has had a huge effect on society as a whole. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that those religious communities also seek to convert other people, so they want to push their beliefs on other people. And this was one of the beliefs that they tried to push on society, and it stuck a little bit. But the harshest affected were definitely the people within that religious community. I found an interesting article on theconversation.com titled, "How Extreme Abstinence of the Purity Movement Created a Sense of Shame in Evangelical Women." Millennial evangelicals are speaking out about the heightened emphasis on sexual purity that characterized their upbringing in that subculture. Joshua Harris, a former pastor who became one of the most public faces of the purity culture movement in the United States with his 1997 book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, recently renounced his views and very publicly left evangelicalism. When his book came out, it was widely read and led many evangelicals to believe that the best path through adolescence and to a fulfilling happy marriage was the embrace of purity culture. So what exactly is the purity movement all about? Culture of abstinence. The label purity culture has a range of meanings. Many use it in its most literal form to refer to efforts, especially in conservative Protestant Christianity, to promote sexual abstinence prior to marriage. But beginning in the 1990s, some groups within conservative U.S. Protestantism began promoting an organized strategy to convince young people that the Bible requires a much more restrictive code, what one author has called extreme abstinence. In 1993, for example, the Southern Baptist Convention launched its True Love Waits campaign, seeking to promote sexual abstinence among Christian youth, with conferences, concerts, and purity pledges. These are reminiscent of 19th century evangelical temperance pledges in which people signed a pledge to abstain from alcohol. So it's not the first time that they've tried to get all of society to conform to biblically influenced constrictive views. Advocates of extreme abstinence advise women to be appropriately submissive, not pursue leadership roles, and not to speak out too much in mixed company, as in mixed within genders. That may mean avoiding mixed company except in tightly regulated circumstances, such as with parents present. All of these concerns become part of how purity is understood. So basically, it's going back to the old school of women and men are separated. It's like gender apartheid. In this view, purity is much more than just refraining from premarital sex and dressing modestly. As I write in my book, Building God's Kingdom, they replace dating with courtship that is pursued under the direction of the young woman's father. Courtship, in this case, means that all interaction between young men and women must be explicitly for the purpose of pursuing marriage and under the permission and oversight of the young woman's father. So it's basically a sexist's wet dream. You're basically controlling all the women and telling them you can't even be in mixed company, so you can't even get to know anyone that thinks differently from you or that might, you might fall in love with naturally. No. This is all in an attempt to control women. Both men and women are expected to remain sexually pure. This includes abstaining from sex, but it also extends to avoiding lustful thoughts. For the young women, being pure also means being responsible for the boys and men around them and comporting themselves in ways that do not tempt others to sin. I feel like this goes back to all of the crazy Christian channels like Girl Defined, The Transformed Wife, Classically Abby, goes back to this really disturbed notion that women are somehow culpable in everything. If a guy thinks a thought about them that's sexual, she's the one to blame because she must have dressed a certain way or acted a certain way, and it's never the men's fault. I feel like this whole thing is just orchestrated by some creepy pervert, a guy who has so little impulse control that he's just like, it must be like this for everyone, and I can't possibly be to blame for my own actions. No, it must be someone around me who's to blame for this. I'm gonna choose women, they're to blame. And if I sexually assault someone, it's not my fault, she led me to do it. Yeah. Purity balls and pledges. I find this particularly disturbing. Throughout the 90s, as I said, they had like concerts and pledges and, like making it seem really fun and cool, stay virgins together. It also started a trend of what is called purity balls. A father-daughter dance where fathers take their prepubescent daughters, dressed in white pretty dresses, and have the daughters pledge not to have sex until marriage. Am I the only one who finds this deeply disturbing, that you would have a child who has no concept of what sexuality is because they haven't even hit puberty yet, make a promise to their father that they won't be doing any business with their bobbity bits? Like, your father shouldn't be in the equation of your bobbity bits, ever. It's disturbing. But yeah, that's a thing that happened. Pervasive. It still happens. It was apparently the most popular in the 90s, early 2000s, but it still happens. Disturbing. Grooming the girls from a young age to think that their purity is something to be protected and to be, it's a commodity. They also teach girls that if you have sex, you're like a chewed piece of gum. And no one wants a chewed piece of gum, they want a fresh piece of gum. And if you don't protect your purity, then you're a chewed piece of gum, which also goes back to victim blaming, where if you get raped, you just didn't protect your purity enough. If a guy attacks you, assaults you, you were wearing the wrong clothing. You were tempting him. It's all the girl's fault, and the boys are also groomed to think that if a girl wears certain set of clothing, then if you have a lustful thought, it's her fault. And it also sort of grooms them to think that they have no control over themselves and that they might just attack someone. And I'm not saying that lightly. I'm saying you're literally raising young boys to think that they can't control themselves in any way, and it's like it's the other person's fault, and if you do something to them, you just couldn't control yourself because you've never been taught how to. You've just been taught not to think about it. But if you can't control it and you think about it and then do something, then you just don't know how to control yourself and stop yourself from doing something because you've never been taught how. It's just disturbing. I also want to point out that rape victims, again, like for instance, Elizabeth Smart, the girl who was abducted when she was like 13. She was abducted, held captive for over a year and her abductor did sexually assault her. She went to school after surviving all of that, and a teacher literally said, if you have sex before marriage, you're a chewed up piece of gum. Imagine saying that to possible victims of sexual assault who literally had no choice in the matter or say in the matter of whether or not they had their purity intact. But then again, they do teach the girls that if your purity isn't intact, you just didn't protect it enough. It's just, oh my god. It's just all around disturbing. It is. It's not true to begin with, but to say it in front of someone who didn't have any say in whether or not their purity, bunny ears, was protected. See, again, protected, like, oh, if someone took it from you, you just didn't protect it enough. Other groups joined in marketing chastity throughout the 1990s with purity rings, books, concerts, and father-daughter purity balls. Yeah, the purity balls. Disturbing. A purity ball is a father-daughter formal dance in which the daughters make a commitment to purity culture and fathers vow to protect their daughter's purity. These activities in general, but purity balls in particular, were especially pervasive in Christian schools and the Christian homeschool movement and in the churches affiliated with them. But come to find, this shit has been detrimental to all the children involved. No one is surprised. Shame and trauma. As the children raised in these evangelical communities have grown to adulthood, a dark picture has emerged of a movement that has promoted shame and sexual ignorance. Yes. Evangelical women have shared their stories of being shamed. There has been a television documentary and a new book that explores the impact of those teachings on everyday lives of young women raised in the culture. Author Linda K. Klein, who grew up in this culture herself, interviewed women to document how these teachings led to guilt and shame as well as profound ignorance about sex and sexuality. That's another thing, like, they don't just wanted to promote abstinence only, they also wanted to make sure that people stuck to those teachings by denying them sexual information. So instead of giving people the information they need to have a healthy, safe sex life, if they so chose, they were like, it's abstinence only or hell, you choose. And it literally was hell for a lot of people, because if you don't know anything about sex and you don't know how to protect yourself from pregnancy or STDs, that's not going to end well, is it? No. Sexuality is a normal, natural thing for humans, and they're just ignoring it. It's a mirrored image of what was happening back in the day. Like, for instance, in Victorian England, a lot of women were so detached from sexuality because they had been brought up to think that it's just not something you do. Purity was so extreme that when women were married and their husbands were like, okay, I expect to have sex with you now, they literally didn't know what was happening, and, you know, it was just completely foreign to them that their husband would be touching them in that sort of way. Coining the phrase, lay back and think of England. As in, lay back, you're going to populate England, feel good about it. It's basically your patriotic duty, even though you hate it. It's not going to lead to a healthy individual. It's not going to lead to a healthy sex life. And it's not going to lead to a healthy relationship with your significant other if it's just, it's bizarre. But also a lot of young men were affected by this in the Victorian ages. And, you know, there's stories of marriages who weren't consummated, aka they never had sex, because both parties were just so ignorant about it. It's not that they didn't want to, because there's people who don't want to, but they just didn't know how because no one taught them, and then it just assumed that they could flip a switch and know how to do everything without being told when you've been isolated and like kept away from it your whole life. It's bizarre. I feel like it also contributed to a culture of cheating, because if your wife has been kept pious her whole life and then she's just, you know, doing it as a chore, you might might seek out a woman who doesn't think it's a chore. And then it goes back to the whole slut shaming, and women who like to have sex are sluts, but, you know, those are the women men wants to sleep with. Takes two to tango. And then, it's like, oh, a wife material versus girl you want to have sex with. It's pervasive, and it's really affected our entire culture. And I feel like the 90s with that movement really emphasized it and empowered it again. Many young adults raised in this subculture have said that they still battle shame and trauma as a result of these teachings, making it difficult to develop healthy adult sexual relations. That's what I said. Just like in Victorian England, if you're going from nothing to married and everything, it's going to be a shock. And if you've constantly been told throughout your entire life that it's dirty and disgusting and shameful, and then you get married and all of a sudden it's not, but then you just have these internalized feelings like, oh, it's dirty, disgusting, you're not going to have a normal, healthy relationship to it, are you? No. The trauma of rape and sexual assault are made worse when women are taught to blame themselves as a result of the crimes against them. Yeah, that's exactly true. It's like, if you're constantly saying that it's the victim's fault, you're also doing a huge disservice to the men you're raising, because you're basically telling the boys that you can't control yourself, and if you have a lustful thought, it's a sin and it's the girl's fault, and you're basically telling them that they might just accidentally rape someone because they have lustful thoughts, instead of teaching them how to have lustful thoughts, have it be normal, and have it be something that you learn to control. You're doing a disservice to both sides. The power of the purity movement. But these teachings serve important social functions in the context in which they persist. As I've written in my book, Evangelical Christian Women, rigid gender norms characterized by women's submission and male authority are at the very heart of the evangelical subculture. Purity culture reinforces that structure. Moreover, in evangelicalism, what makes a person a Christian is having had a conversion experience, sometimes called being born again or saved. The conversion experience involves experiencing an overwhelming sense of guilt and a strong desire to seek forgiveness for sins. Many evangelicals, then, want to protect their own children from the temptations that led to that very experience of guilt necessary for conversion. Purity culture encourages fundamentally unattainable gender norms and purity requirements. That is, not only must unmarried people abstain from sex, but that merely thinking about sex risks eternal damnation. These rules create a powerful sense of shame and failure by design, even when there is no other sin that would seem worthy of hell. That sense of shame and failure creates the need for exactly what the evangelical tradition provides: salvation. So, yeah, I feel like that's a direct consequence if you raise people to be so disturbed by their own natural sexual thoughts and feelings, and then just expect them to, revert back to, oh, but it's okay when they get married. It's just setting you up to fail. But then maybe that's what they want, because then you need salvation and you have to stick around in the religion. I don't know. It's disturbing. But as I said, it has had an impact on culture overall in the Western world. It really has. Although I see that it's becoming less and less so. Although some people are very upset with this, because why can't it be like the olden days? I take comfort in the fact that people are becoming less and less purity culture affected. I know that it affected my adolescent years a lot, where I just viewed myself as, oh, at least I haven't lost my purity, because it's also framed as, oh, if you have sex before marriage, then you lose something. You've lost something of yourself that you can never get back, and you're dirty and you're disgusting, and it really very negatively affected me personally. Like, the purity of a woman was a commodity, where if you don't have it, you're not worth anything, and you have to give it to your husband. It's a gift you give to your husband. And if you can't give him that gift, you're not worth anything, and you're dirty and disgusting. So, I'm glad that we're less so today. I feel like there's hope in humanity, because I see that people are more open and people are more educated and less affected by it. But it genuinely did really affect me growing up. Very fascinating, though. Do comment below if you have any experiences of your own with this, or if you have any thoughts on it, or if you've been affected by it even if you're not in an environment like that. Do comment below. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you'll come back for more. I'm going to do a follow-up if any of the comments are thought-provoking and bring out more stuff to talk about. Definitely. So see you then. Come back every day for real talk. Fridays are Reddit readings, and soon true crime on Wednesdays. If you want to help me make this my full-time career, come back and continue watching my videos. It's literally what makes a difference. Thank you. Okay, love you, bye.